Alright, so I thought that it would be a really good idea to be more interactive with an online class for College Anatomy and Physiology Part 2 by making my own YouTube videos. So I'm going to start by reviewing a lecture outline that I made after reading the chapter, highlighting quite a bit about the endocrine system. We're going to start with the comparison control by the nervous and endocrine system. The nervous system acts through nerve impulses, so it's a lot quicker and short-lived compared to the endocrine system, which takes longer, but the effects also last longer. Endocrine glands, there are two types, exocrine and endocrine. Exocrine, kind of self-explanatory, secretes outside of the body. The secreted products go into the ducts, which carry the secretion in the body cavities, the lumina of an organ, or the outer surface of the body. You'll see this during sweat, oil, mucus, or digestive glands. The endocrine glands secrete hormones into the interstitial fluid of the secretory cells and then into the blood, which then goes to the target cells. Let's see. Endocrine glands include the pituitary, thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal, and pineal glands. And all endocrine glands and hormone-secreting cells constitute the endocrine system. Then we'll go to hormone activity and the role of hormone receptors. Hormones affect a specific target cell. They influence these target cells by chemically binding to specific protein receptors. And these receptors are constantly being synthesized and broken down. If there's a lot of one hormone, the receptors will go down, and that would be called downregulation, and vice versa. If there is not enough hormones, the receptors will increase, and that is called upregulation. And that's kind of healthy for keeping a good balance of the hormone and its effect on the body. And then we'll go into circulating and local hormones, and we'll talk about the differences of those. Local hormones, they act on neighboring cells or on themselves. When they act on neighboring cells, they're called paracrines, and when they act upon themselves, they are called autocrines. Circulating hormones linger in the blood, and they affect for a few minutes, occasionally a few hours, and are inactivated by the liver and excreted by the kidneys. Chemical classes of hormones will have lipid-soluble and water-soluble. Lipid-soluble include steroid hormones derived from cholesterol, and thyroid hormones, and the gas nitric oxide, which is both a neurotransmitter and a hormone. Then there's also water-soluble hormones, which is amine hormones, synthesized by removing CO2 and modifying certain amino acids. Peptide hormones and protein hormones. Also, hormone transportation in the blood. As for water-soluble hormones, molecules circulate in the blood plasma in a free form, which means they're not attached to other molecules, and lipid-soluble hormones are bound to transport proteins, which are synthesized by cells in the liver and have three main functions. These functions they make lipid-soluble hormones temporarily water-soluble so that they can to increase their solubility in the blood. They also retard the passage of small hormone molecules through the filtering mechanism in the kidneys and lower the rate that hormones are lost through the urine. And they provide a ready reserve of hormones already present in the bloodstream. Generally, 0.1 to 10% of the molecules of lipid-soluble hormones are not bound to a transport protein, This is called free fraction, which diffuses out of the capillaries, binds to receptors, and triggers responses. Transport proteins will release new hormones to replenish the free fraction. Kind of weird. Mechanisms of hormone action. We won't go too far into depth of that. Hormone interactions. The responsiveness of a target cell to a hormone depends on the hormone's concentration in the blood, the abundance of the target cell's hormone receptors, and the influences exerted by other hormones. Let's see. There's a synergistic effect, which is when the effect of two hormones acting together is greater or more extensive than the effect of each hormone acting alone. Antagonistic effect is when one hormone opposes the action of another. A good example of that is insulin. Control of hormone secretion. The release of most hormones occurs in short bursts, with little or no secretion between bursts. When stimulated, the endocrine gland will release hormones in more frequent bursts. Blood level of hormones decrease when there is no stimulation. Hormone secretion is regulated by signals from the nervous system, chemical changes in the blood, and other hormones. Most hormonal regulatory systems work with a negative feedback system. Some do work via positive feedback systems, but I think our primary focus is negative feedback. As for the hypothalamus and pituitary gland, the pituitary gland is also known as hypophysis. It secretes several hormones that control other endocrine glands. The hypothalamus secretes 9 different hormones, whereas the pituitary secretes 7. The hypothalamus is a major link between the nervous and the endocrine system. You could pretty much think of it as kind of like a chain link. The nervous system cues the hypothalamus cues the pituitary gland, which cues other glands to secrete hormones. And together they play important roles on pretty much all aspects of growth, development, metabolism, and homeostasis. The pituitary gland itself is a pea-shaped structure that lies between the hypophyseal fossa of the cella turcica and the sphenoid bone. It attaches to the hypothalamus stalk, also known as the infundibulum, and has 2 anatomically and functionally separate portions, which would be the anterior and posterior pituitary. I won't go into too much detail about that. The book that I have does have quite a bit on its own about it. Let's see, a type of anterior pituitary cells and their hormones I will briefly discuss is somatotrophs, human growth hormone, somatotropin, insulin-like growth factors, thyrotrophs, TSH, which is abbreviation, thyrotropin, gonadotropins, which would be FSH and LH, lactotrophs, prolactin, corticotrophs, adrenocorticotropic hormone, also known as ACTH, or corticotropin, melanocyte stimulating hormone, or MSH. If you want to look up all these abbreviations, they're all in the book. I just really don't feel like pronouncing them. That's about it. That they control secretion, or control secretions by the anterior pituitary, human growth hormone, insulin-like growth factors, hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia. You can all find that in our book under the anterior pituitary. Let's see what else we got here. The thyroid gland. The thyroid gland is a butterfly shape and located inferior to the larynx. It has a right and left lateral lobe on either side of the trachea that are connected by an isthmus anterior to the trachea. About 50% of the thyroid glands have small third lobe, called the pyramidal lobe, that extends superiorly from the thymus. Microscopic spherical sacs called thyroid follicles make up most of the thyroid gland. The wall of each follicle consists primarily of cells called follicular cells. Most extend to the lumen, or internal space of the follicle. And then a basement membrane surrounds each follicle. And then when the follicular cells are inactive, their shape is loculo-squamous, and they change when they're active. These cells produce 2 hormones, thyroxine, or T4, and tritothyronine, T3. And together these are known as the thyroid hormones. Few cells have parafollicular cells, or C cells, between the follicles that produce the hormone calcitonin. Now we're going to talk about the formation, storage, and release of thyroid hormones. We're just going to briefly mention each step. First one is iodine trapping, then the synthesis of thyroglobulin, or TGB, oxidation of iodine, iodination of tyrosine, coupling of T1 and T2, pinocytosis and digestion of colloid, secretion of thyroid hormones, transport in the blood. Actions of thyroid hormones. If you're reading the book that I am, if you're in my class, this can be found on page 698 or in our discussion board. The control of the thyroid, so we'll skip that. Control of thyroid hormone secretion. Well, I'm going to skip over that. There's a good example of that in the book. And we'll go straight to conditions that increase ATP demand. Those conditions would be cold environment, hypoglycemia, high altitude, pregnancy, and also increase in secretion of thyroid hormones. The parathyroid glands. Partially embedded in the posterior surface of the lateral lobes of the thyroid gland. There's usually one superior, one inferior, and they contain two types of epithelial cells. Chief or principal cells, which are more numerous and produce parathyroid hormone, and an oxyphil cell, which is not known in a normal parathyroid gland. In cancer, this secretes excess PTH, parathyroid hormone. The parathyroid hormone itself is a major regulator of calcium, magnesium, phosphate in the blood. Specific function is to increase the number of activity of osteoclasts, elevating bone resorption. It also acts on the kidneys by decreasing loss of calcium and magnesium through urine. It promotes formation of calcitriol, which is the active form of vitamin D. And blood calcium level directly controls the secretion of calcitonin and parathyroid hormone via the negative feedback loops, not involving the pituitary gland. As for the adrenal glands, or suprarenal glands, they lie superior to each kidney in the retroperitoneal space. During embryonic development, it divides into the adrenal cortex and adrenal medulla. The adrenal glands have connective tissue capsules and are highly vascular. The adrenal cortex produces steroid hormones that are essential to life. Complete loss of adrenocortical hormones leads to death due to dehydration and electrolyte imbalance. The adrenal medulla produces three catecholamine hormones, norepinephrine and epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, and small amounts of dopamine. And the adrenal cortex zones can be found in the discussion that we had in Dr. B's class as well online. And as well as the RAA pathway, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone pathway. Which regulates metabolism and resistance to stress, and includes cortisol, corticosterone, and cortisone, secreted by the zona fasciculata, cortisol being the most abundant. About 95% of the glucocorticoid activity. We're talking about glucocorticoids, which also occurs via negative feedback. The glucocorticoids have several effects: protein breakdown, glucose formation, lipolysis, resistance to stress, anti-inflammatory effects, depression of immune responses. And then let's see, the pancreatic islets. And the pancreas is both an endocrine gland and an exocrine gland, which is 99% of the exocrine cells in the pancreas are arranged in clusters called acini. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but I tried. And these acini produce digestive enzymes that flow into the gastrointestinal tract through a network of ducts. Scattered among these acini are 1 to 2 million tiny clusters of endocrine tissue called pancreatic islets, or islets of Langerhans. And there are lots of capillaries in this gland. Cells of the pancreatic islet, A cells, B cells, D cells, and F cells. A cells secrete glucagon, B cells secrete insulin, D cells secrete somatostatin, F cells secrete pancreatic polypeptide. And glucagon raises the blood sugar, insulin lowers it. Somatostatin inhibits glucagon and insulin and slows absorption of nutrients from GI tract and inhibits secretion of the growth hormone. Pancreatic polypeptide inhibits somatostatin secretion, gallbladder contraction, secretion of digestive enzymes by the pancreas. Regulation of glucagon and insulin can be found on page 709. Although the blood glucose level is the most important regulator of insulin and glucagon, several hormones and neurotransmitters also regulate the release of these two hormones. Glucagon stimulates insulin directly. Insulin has the opposite effect, suppressing glucagon secretion. As blood sugar declines, alpha cells of pancreas are released from inhibitory effects of insulin so they can secrete glucagon. Human growth hormone and adrenocorticotropic indirectly stimulate secretion of insulin because they act to elevate blood glucose. Insulin secretion is also stimulated by acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter or hormone, liberated from axon terminals of the parasympathetic vagus nerve fibers that innervate the pancreatic islet. The amino acids arginine and leucine, which would be present in the blood at higher levels of after a protein-containing meal, and glucose-dependent insulinotropic peptide, or GIP, a hormone released by enteroendocrine cells of the small intestine in response to the presence of glucose in the GI tract. Thus, digestion and absorption of food containing both carbs and proteins provides strong stimulation for insulin release. Glucagon, on the other hand, secretion is stimulated by increased activity in the sympathetic division of the ANS, as occurs during exercise, and a rise in blood amino acids if blood glucose level is low, which could occur after a meal that contained mainly protein. The ovaries and testes. Gonads are organs that produce gametes. They secrete hormones, and the ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone. Their female hormones, along with FSH and LH from the anterior pituitary, regulate the menstrual cycle, maintain pregnancy, and prepare mammary glands for lactation. They also promote enlargement of the breasts and widening of the hips during puberty and help maintain female secondary characteristics. And they produce relaxin, which increases flexibility of the pubic symphysis during pregnancy and helps dilate the uterine cervix during labor and delivery to ease passage. The testes secrete testosterone and androgen, male sex hormones. Testosterone stimulates descent of the testes before birth, regulates production of sperm, stimulates development and maintenance of male secondary characteristics. And they produce inhibin, which inhibits secretion of FSH. The pineal gland in the thymus is a small endocrine gland attached to the roof of the third ventricle of the brain at the midline. Part of the epithalamus is covered by a capsule formed by the pia mater. The gland consists of masses of neuroglia and secretory cells called pinealocytes. Pineal gland secretes melatonin and amine hormones derived from serotonin. Melatonin contributes to the biological clock, controlled by the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus. And melatonin promotes sleep due to, is believed to promote sleep because it is produced more when it is dark versus when it is light. And it is also an antioxidant. And inhibits reproductive functions in animals, but effects on humans is unknown. Melatonin is higher in children. The thymus is behind the sternum between the lungs. Thymus plays a role in immunity. Hormones produced by thymus would be thymosin, thymic humoral factor, or THF, thymic factor, TF, or thymopoietin. And they promote the maturation of T cells that may retard the aging process. Other endocrine tissues and organs, eicosanoids and growth factors. Other endocrine tissues and hormones that secrete